Hey, this is Anney.
And Samantha.
And welcome to Stuff I Never Told You, a production of iHeartRadio. And welcome to what is a bit of a downer, I'm going to go ahead and tell you, of a Monday Mini.
With the world the way it is, isn't it always?
I had a handful of topics to choose from, and I can tell you none of them were great. But as this comes out, it is the last day of March, and it is the last day of Women's History Month. And so we wanted to do a check-in on another piece that happened during this Women's History Month as we close out, and that's Equal Pay Day. So if you don't know, the way Equal Pay Day works is it is the date that full-time women employees have to work beginning with the new year to make up for what their largely white male counterparts made in the previous year, aka the gender wage gap. This year, it fell on March 25th, 2025, which is pretty bad. Not good. And as we've talked about in several past episodes, the gap is worse for women of color. We're talking like 50, 60 cents in some cases. And it also gets worse with age, usually due to things like childcare. So you can look up, we've done a lot of past episodes on that you can check out. As of now, women are still paid on average 83 cents to the dollar compared to men in similar positions. And it's 75 cents if you include part-time workers. And the World Economic Forum estimates at this rate, it will take 134 years to close the gap, but others think that that is optimistic at best. According to the National Women's Law Center, over the span of a 40-year career, a woman entering the workforce stands to lose about $1 million due to this gap, the so-called wealth gap. Jasmine Tucker, the center's vice president of research, said, "When you look at it by race and gender, that disparity is even wider. This means that women are never, ever going to catch up." Just in a year, a woman is missing out an estimated $14,000, which could be enough to help pay for things like childcare. You can look it up, like all the things that $14,000 could help cover. But childcare is a big example. And this data is from 2023 and includes part-time work. Having to take unpaid parental leave can mean women are missing out on thousands and thousands of dollars. I was reading an article about this before, and one of the women interviewed said she lost about $10,000. And yes, many worry that the cuts on DEI will not only make things worse here in the U.S., but will make the disparities easier to hide, especially because, you know, we have all these cuts and the hamstringing of agencies that are meant to enforce laws around non-discrimination and equal pay. And actually, we laugh because it's terrible. The gender wage gap got worse between 2022 and 2023. So it appears we're going backwards. And there are already some pretty dire estimates about what's going to happen next year. 2023 research offered the same theories as to why this gap exists and persists and has seemingly stalled since the 80s. They were things that we've talked about before. Women pursuing lower paying jobs, though I would argue many of those jobs are lower paying because they're viewed as women's work. Pregnancy discrimination and the motherhood penalty, the lack of paid parental leave, COVID, we talked about that a lot and how bad that was, and plain old systemic bias. And all of this also impacts retirement and savings. Women aim to save away about $9,500 a year, while men are looking at almost $18,000, which is a substantial difference. Obviously, these are averages, but oof. Recent studies are indicating that return to work policies are also disproportionately hurting women too. However, as discussed previously, working from home does not directly relate to more pay, but there is a lot of benefit in terms of the flexibility and childcare, which again, though, is extra work that the woman in question is doing. Typically, because we've talked about how a lot of this kind of domestic care and childcare still falls onto women. Okay, so that's not good. But there has been movement around paid transparency laws and paid parental leave. But yes, it has been slow and inconsistent. And there's been research that indicates that equal pay is good for both the employee and the employer, since when someone thinks they're being paid fairly, they stick around longer. And the company avoids retention cost or like training cost. But yeah, it's pretty inconsistent. And who knows if it'll stick around. Yeah. So that's where we are on Equal Pay Day this year. There are a lot of statistics that go into much further depth if you're interested. And I do think it's worth looking it up. And as always, when we do these grim episodes, it's worth reminding ourselves that people are fighting this fight. There are ways that we can fight this fight as well. And also to keep in mind that these are averages and there are a lot of specifics to break down in this conversation. But it's frustrating because it's kind of going backwards and it's pretty much been the same since the 80s. And I'm kind of tired of like so much of this work that is so important that women do being devalued.
Right. I mean, we had a minute in this conversation about talking how being a stay-at-home mom is a lot of work, and no one acknowledges that. And I have started recently to acknowledge that and seeing that as something that is worthwhile and should be deemed as important as well. But also people who are doing the double duty of being a full-time parent as well as a full-time job, how much that costs for them and how much of labor that really is. And it's really irritating because they have this whole level of like, let's go back to the women going back home, but they really don't want women to go back home because they need them in the workforce and they need those jobs to be continued, but they just don't want to pay correctly. And also they don't want to acknowledge that is more work.
Yeah.
But there's so many things that at this point we have to look at, but it feels like they're doing the most to take down so much that it's one of the smaller conversations again. Like equal pay should be at the top of the conversation, but it's not anymore. It's more about like now discrimination in general.
Mm-hmm.
And whether or not women have rights in workplaces and marginalized people having rights in workplaces. So now it's like, oh dear God, we have gone back to the 70s, 60s in that conversation instead of coming back to trying to find equal pay.
Yeah. Like I said, I had a lot of topics to choose from for the Monday Mini, but it has to be a mini. I was trying to make it a mini, Samantha.
You did good.
Thank you.
It is a mini, and now we have more to think on.
Yep, we sure do. Well, listeners, if you have any thoughts about this, please let us know. You can email us at hello@stuffwhatevertoldyou.com. You can find us on Blue Sky at One Stuff Podcast or on Instagram and TikTok at Stuff Whatever Told You. We're also on YouTube. We have a TeePublic store and we have a book you can get wherever you get your books. Thanks as always to our super producer Christina, our executive producer Maya, and our contributor Joey.
Thank you.
And thanks to you for listening. Stuff I Never Told You is a production of iHeartRadio. For more podcasts from iHeartRadio, you can check out the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your favorite shows.